What's up YouTube? Derby Welder coming at you with another video. So today we're going to be going over a viewer requested video is how wire feeder suitcases work, and certain wire feeders in general also kind of work like these suitcases. So this video is just going to be called how wire feeders work. Now a wire feeder, what it is in the welding industry, is usually something like this. This is a Lincoln LN25 right here, and that is a Miller Suitcase Arc Reach 8. These are probably variations of two of the most common suitcase feeders you're going to see, the Lincoln and the Miller. Now I have both of them out here to show you some differences. They are kind of, Miller Lincoln is like Ford versus Chevy. They are both two sides of the same coin, so we're not really going to get into too much of that. I love my Lincoln LN25 ironworker variation because I got it for really cheap. I also really like my Arc Reach Suitcase 8 because it has Arc Reach that connects to my Miller Trailblazer back here. That is a very important feature we're going to go over here in a minute. So stick around, let's go. So before we get started, there's something very important that we have to understand about these suitcase feeders, and that is they require an external power source, whether it be an engine drive welder like that Trailblazer or some kind of shop machine that is meant to interact with these. And not all of these really do require a machine that is specifically meant for wire. So Miller has what they call Arc Reach technology. This actually talks to the Trailblazer. You can see this is a Arc Reach Trailblazer, and this is a Arc Reach Suitcase 8. And what that does is it allows me to also adjust the voltage from the suitcase as I would at the machine. This Lincoln does not have that. Lincoln has their own proprietary technology for slightly newer setups. That's how I got this Lincoln so cheap, was they were selling this to go get what Lincoln calls crosslink. They're replacing all their LN25s with LN25 crosslinks. It has a voltage display. It'll tell you what the voltage is, but you can't do anything about it. You can adjust your wire feed. That's it. Now, we go to the back of each of these machines. Each of them have one of these little connectors right here. This weld connector right here is how you connect it to the machine. It's just like, you know, your welding lead disconnects right here, like I have going into my Trailblazer. You have to have a machine that has this output or have adapted something to this output for it to work. One thing you have to also understand is just because you plug it in doesn't mean it's going to turn on. Each of these machines have a little ground cable that's dedicated to the suitcase machine. You have to hook this ground cable to your work so it completes the circuit so it can turn on. You can sit here and pull the trigger all day long, but the circuit's not complete, so it can't turn on. This can serve multiple purposes depending on what your setup is. This, being that it is Arc Reach 8, is an Arc Reach. This completes the circuit, allows it to communicate to the Trailblazer, so you can adjust your voltage here. And when you pull the trigger, it's all connected, and it'll actually turn on. Machines like this that are meant to work with just about anything and everything, this will work with just about anything and everything too, but this a little bit more so. This will work with any machine. It does not have to have a wire feed mode. It does not have to have a crosslink, Arc Reach, anything like that. This one's basically meant you plug it in, turn it on, and it goes. In fact, it's so built like that it doesn't even have an on switch. This one, you connect the ground, and as soon as you connect the ground, it turns on. It threw me off for a while. It also can somehow detect constant current versus constant voltage, which is your difference between stick mode, MIG mode. Something very important to keep in mind is your work polarity. Gases, this is generalized, there are exceptions to this. Wires that use gas run on positive. Wires that are self-shielded run on negative. So your solid wire, dual shield, self-shielded. That's a generalization. it does not necessarily mean that rule applies to every single kind of wire. So when you buy wire, make sure you understand what wire you're buying and understand how it's supposed to be ran. A good example is E71T11, which is a very, very common kind of self-shielded wire. It can sort of run on either one, but it likes to run on negative better. Dual shield E71T1C is a very common type of dual shield. It's everywhere. If you ask for dual shield, that's usually what they're going to give you unless they don't know what they're talking about at the welding supply store. Wouldn't be the first time that's happened. That runs on electrode positive, just like MIG. And by MIG, I mean your solid wire, your E70T-6. It's very important that you research AWS classifications and what they mean and how they apply to what you're trying to do. Because if not, you're going to get really confused. Wire is classified just like your stick rods. So take some time to try and understand all of this. Now that we have a rudimentary understanding of what we're dealing with, let's turn on the Trailblazer and get to it. One thing to keep in mind, if you're using the Trailblazer, that is completely different than a lot of other machines. Like my Bobcat didn't even have this issue. There is a dedicated port for wire negative. That is what your Suitcase needs to be plugged into. It will work on TIG stick gouge negative, but for whatever reason, there's a dedicated port for the CV mode, wire mode on this machine. Now the machine is on, we can go here to output. This is strictly for the Trailblazer or any of the machines with Miller that have this kind of setup right here. Not all Millers even have that. The Bobcat has actual mechanical click levers. So, we want to run gas, no gas, gas, remote on off. We don't really have to worry about that. For this, we want self-shielded wires. That's what we're planning on running. See, it changes there. Now the machine is waiting for a connection. It will try to reach out to a Suitcase, and eventually it won't make that connection because we're not plugged in. Now we are plugged in, and how I have these designated is red is positive, black is negative. Remember, we're running self-shielded wires, so we want gun negative, ground positive. You can see we have our ground off of the Suitcase hooked to our ground there. This will allow us to turn on the Suitcase. We turn it on, Trailblazer idles up. We give it a second. Now the Suitcase and the Trailblazer are talking to each other. It actually locks out voltage control at the Trailblazer, so you can't adjust the voltage of the Trailblazer no more, but all your voltage adjustment is now here. Now obviously if you're running dual shield or any process that requires gas, you have to plug gas into the back of it. This can be from just your regulator to that, or I have a hose with some quick connects. I will link these in the description below. These quick connects on that hose could go right into here when I need to run gas. One thing I forgot to mention that it does is when I hook up my Suitcase 8, it understands it's hooked up to that Suitcase 8, and it defaults back to the last settings I had when I was running that Suitcase 8. So when I started, I said flux core, no gas, self-shielded. But look, the last time I ran that, I was running flux core with gas. It reset itself. It'll do that if I'm over here on 6010 mode. I plug in that Suitcase, it'll go right back to my last setting there. So, look at the Lincoln. I'm going to flux core self-shielded. Now, since the Lincoln, for whatever reason, has no on-off switch, I honestly believe it was the idea of just keeping this feeder extremely simple. There is no on-off switch. So, this ground clamp, as soon as I hook it up, Trailblazer idled up. There we go. That can even be red. negative right there lets me know that we are electrode negative, not positive. We want to be negative because we're going to be running flux core wire, cell shielded wire. That right there, see that this is on, that's telling us that's our wire feed. For whatever reason, there's a amp. I don't know why. I guess that's when I pull the trigger, it'll read how many amps are coming out. But this one is very, 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 very simple. There's not a lot to this machine. It's clamp it, plug it in, clamp, go. And we got a Trailblazer. Trailblazer doesn't recognize it, so it stayed on the last setting. You don't have to have a Trailblazer like this. It could just be stick mode. About stick mode, the Lincoln figures it out. It understands if it's on stick mode or MIG mode, and it adjusts accordingly. Not all of them do that. So here we have CV, that's your wire feed mode. CC, that's your stick mode. So if I was to hook this to a machine that did not have wire feed mode, like a Champion Elite, or a SA200, or an Old Miller Big Blue or Big 50, I would have to set that to CC mode for it to function mostly correctly. However, newer machines like the Trailblazer and Bobcat that have a wire feed mode, I would switch that to CV so it would run perfect just like a MIG machine. This Lincoln figures it out somehow. It understands if it's on CV or CC mode. One thing, important thing to keep in mind, and make sure you have some drive roll tension on here. You don't want this, you know, bird nesting on you. There's definitely not enough on there. You can tell it started doing a little bird nesting right there. It's a little bit better. Another thing, you gotta make sure you have the correct drive rollers. If you're running cord wire, you want knurled drive rollers for the diameter wire you're running. If you're running solid wire, you want smooth drive rollers. The reason you want knurled drive rollers for a flux core is this wire is tubular. The fluxes are on the inside, that's why I call flux core wire. So the knurledness of this roller right here allows you to push the wire without having to pinch it real hard. If you pinch it real hard, you will actually split the wire open and it'll mess up the fluxes and you get all sorts of nasty stuff going on. So it even gives you a little chart here, and this is subjective. As the spring wears out, it changes, and the size wire, it kind of changes. You can see this machine was a little wore out when I got it, so I had to crank it down a little more. But it's kind of subjective. It kind of gives you an idea of where you should be, and then you adjust it. Now, if everything is set up correctly, we should be able to weld. One thing to keep in mind, forgot to mention this earlier, just like on a 7018 rod, where the end, where it can be a hard start, hard restart, you have a little doodah right there, that is actually slag built up on the end, and it will restart really poorly. This is very common with self-shielded wires, so you got to break it off, pull our wire back out. Now, another thing, if you do a lot of solid MIG welding, solid wire MIG welding, is you're going to have to use a longer stick out than you're used to. That's because it needs, the fluxes need to heat up before it goes into the weld pool. That will give you a cleaner weld. It takes a little practice and a little bit of time. Self-shielded wire can be extremely dusty like that, and it puts out a lot of BBs and buckshot. You can dial it in a little bit better to minimize it, but that's just kind of the nature of self-shielded wire right there. That's what it does. Now, when we are done for today, best practice before turning off our welder is to turn off our suitcase first. In this case, that turns it off. Turn off your suitcase first, then go to your welder and turn it off. I doubt it makes much of a difference, but it's better to be safe than sorry and be polite to your equipment so it lasts you a very long time. So the reason that I made this video is because there is not a lot of information on how these suitcases work as far as videos go. The information I wouldn't say is gate kept, but I guess the idea is by the time you get to the point where you can afford these, you should be able to figure it out, and that's not always the case. As I have found out talking to other people, that people will sit there and they'll weld with these things for months and months and months, years even, and they just walk in, it's already set up. All they have to do is put on a hood and pull a trigger. They have no clue how this thing is even set up. They don't understand the settings. They don't understand how it interacts with the other machine. Nothing like that. And that is a failing of the employers to teach their employees their jobs correctly, because there's more than just pulling a trigger to welding. There is a technical side of it. There is a math side of it. There is a understanding side of it. So that's why I made this video, so people can understand how these suitcases work, and hopefully I can take away some of the mystery from it and try to get people into using these things more, because these things will absolutely save you so much time. They'll save you so much money. They'll save you so much headache. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to my channel. And you guys have a fantastic day.